Hello, my name is Noah Billig. I'm an associate professor in landscape architecture in the FAY School of Architecture and Design. Today, I'd like to, along with my colleague Carl Smith, talk to you about your neighborhood and neighborhood as an extension of your home. And we really want to look at the neighborhood through 4 different systems. We want to look at circulation systems, land use systems or program systems, building systems, and natural systems. And when you look at your neighborhoods, oftentimes we look at our neighborhoods and cities through maps that we see on our phones or on the computer. And what we want you to do today, and it'll be demonstrated by our students, is create what we call mental maps. And mental maps are a way of documenting your neighborhood and documenting the places that are important to you on your own piece of paper. And so they're not perfect, but they show what's important to you and what's important to your family.
So if we can say that meaning is important when we're talking about the design of buildings and landscapes, so it follows that your interpretation of the meaning of things is just as important as your interpretation of things that are what we might call objective or universal, things that could be measured. So we're talking about how you perceive a certain place to be, and it's important that we draw a distinction between place and space. So a space is a piece of land. It is something that can be measured, it has dimensions, whereas a place is something that has been claimed by our emotions, by attachment, and by associations. So in your neighborhood, there might be things that you want to map that you consider to be very important that may not mean as much to another person. At the same time, there might be things like a school or a church which you know are universally accepted as being important to your neighborhood. And so both of these things help us to create what we might call a mental map. So these are very different from the maps that you might be used to seeing in a book or on Google Earth because they're not universal necessarily. It doesn't necessarily follow that the things that you think are important and the way that you perceive them are the same as the next person. So when you are mapping your neighborhood in the different layers of architecture, of nature, of program, and of circulation, it's very important to understand that there is no right or wrong answer here. We're not asking you to create a map which we could give to somebody else and they would be able to find their way. This is a personal document which is about your reading of your neighborhood. So if there's a place that you think is important, then that's fine and you should include that in your mental map. Throughout history and across the world, civilizations have used buildings not just as shelter but as a primary means of expressing higher ideas of culture, art and creativity, the divine and the spiritual, and as a principal means of ordering settlements and cities. In this example from Santa Cruz de la Sierra in Bolivia, the Cathedral Basilica of St. Lawrence, also called the Santa Cruz de la Sierra Cathedral, provides a spiritual focus for the city, overlooking all the other buildings and the lives of the citizens. The importance of the building is denoted by its scale, the beautiful craftsmanship, and its destination as a place of pilgrimage. Even a building that is dwarfed by a surrounding landscape, rather than other buildings, can be shown to be important because of the way all things are ordered in relation to its design. Here at Hampton Court in England, we can see how the massive gardens, which stretch towards the horizon, are laid out to accentuate the importance of the palace. Even in medieval times, when many European towns and cities would have had a much less formal layout, we can still guess which buildings are important, as they still occupy important positions at the end of axes, important corners, or within large associated spaces. In modern-day America, as throughout history and across the globe, we can see the importance of buildings as landmarks, ordering spaces and our understanding of the city as a mental image, and denoting what is important in our society.
Hi, I'm Cameron. I'm a third-year architecture student here at the FAY School of Architecture and Design. and today we're going to be working on this neighborhood project. So we're going to be making a mental map and then drawing that mental map on a sheet of paper, and we're going to be looking at architectural systems today as we observe and make notes and eventually make marks on our paper. So what I'm going to be doing today is kind of walking through my memory of Central Campus, so that being the Student Union for one, the Mullins Library, which is right behind me now, the FAY School of Architecture and Design, or Fullwalker Hall, which is currently right there, as well as Old Main, which is probably the most recognizable building on campus. You can usually see that from the highway both north and south of Fayetteville. So these four buildings that we're going to be looking at, observing, and marking today, they all exist on a sort of axis on the main campus. And I'm sitting right in the middle of that axis. So what I mean when I say that is that those four sort of buildings that we're going to be drawing exist in a line. And if on one end, that way, is the western end of campus, and Old Main is at the very sort of east end of campus, a line between those has those four buildings, starting with the Union, going to Mullins Library, into Fullwalker Hall right here, and then ending with Old Main at the very end. So now that we have a pretty or somewhat clearer idea of an architectural system, I can explain to you why I'm choosing to do these four buildings. Is that I find that I go between these four buildings a lot when I'm on campus moving between classes. Now they're kind of important because they're some of the most centrally located, so that gives us a clue of their importance. And they're some of the bigger buildings on campus, so that's another way we know they're important. Old Main's the original building, so of course it's important. Clues like this give us an idea of the spaces that really define our community. You're going to be looking at natural systems as well, movement and circulation, program and usage, and in this one, architectural systems. And the value in looking at these four different categories of information and design is that once you look at each of those on their own, you'll notice that they don't distinguish from each other so easily. It's not that you have architectural systems and program and they're clearly one and clearly the other. These sorts of things start to blend together and overlap. And as you notice that, you can detect those impacts on your experience in the space. But it's also important because there's a pretty important circulation aspect to where I am right here. There's a sidewalk that runs right through here, and right behind me is the central access through campus, that what I was talking about. And people will move through campus, through these buildings, because of that central avenue. When we look at architectural systems, I can see that these big openings between these buildings and this portico behind me sort of inform even people who aren't familiar with campus that they have access to those spaces and they can use them to transverse. And when you do that, you create a very dynamic sense of movement and space through a community. So when you are looking at your own communities, it's important to look for those sorts of things as well. Now that you've observed, made a mental map, and taken note on your paper, you have a good understanding of what architectural systems are, and you're on your way to understanding your neighborhood and your community in a much more cohesive way.
Wherever you live, a neighborhood in a downtown with many buildings, or in the countryside where you're surrounded by greenery, there is always some natural systems present, even if you can't see them or notice them much. Our urban parks may have been originally built to provide non-nature benefits in our cities. However, often we find parks designed and managed to allow nature to play a more prominent role, with native plants and wild areas complementing the more carefully designed and managed parkland. Even more humble green features, such as street trees, can make a contribution to the natural system of helping control rainwater, reducing the heat and carbon requirements of our neighborhoods, and helping wildlife. Wetlands and drainage can be created by human engineering, as well as occurring in naturally low-lying areas. They can receive water from our streets and homes, our parking lots and roofs, and allows water to sink into the soil and replenish the groundwater. As a type of urban or suburban land cover, yards and gardens are vital. Not only do they help us to stay happy and healthy, they provide wildlife with opportunities for food, shelter, and movement. Together, parks, yards, wetlands, and street trees provide a natural system, even in towns and cities, that eventually can connect into our countryside, a potentially unbroken green network of health and vitality.
Hi, I'm Bo Burris. I'm a fifth-year landscape architecture student here at the FAY Design School. I'm here on Old Main Lawn, also known as the Old Main Arboretum. I'm going to be drawing and observing some of the natural systems here on campus, and this is a pretty good place to do it because we have a pretty significant collection of old trees from all across the country. What you'll immediately notice when you start to draw natural systems is that trees are the most notable part of the entire thing. They're big, they throw a lot of shade, and they do the most out of any element of the natural landscape to form space. So despite the fact that those are the most evident pieces of the landscape, I'm always going to start by drawing the buildings to help ground my drawing and the path systems that wind between them. I'm not super worried about getting this part done perfectly accurately. I'm not going to measure anything. I'm just going to throw the buildings down on the page to start to get a feel for what the space is going to be like and what size of land I'm going to try to document. So we have our engineering hall over here that I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the paths leading up to the buildings. That'll help me get a frame of reference for where the rest of them will fall. So both of these paths extend pretty much all the way across the lawn. And then it looks like I have a diagonal cutting where they meet. They turn into a diagonal. I'll redo that one. And then just down the way a little bit, I'm gonna have another diagonal that ends up pointing toward Old Main. These aren't necessarily to scale, but that's okay because, like I said, these hardscape elements aren't the most important part of this drawing. It's gonna really come down to, in this situation, the trees. So I'm gonna start with the biggest ones that'll give me a sort of a frame of reference. I'm just gonna eyeball tree trunk size and canopy size. These are gonna fall on the page as circles within a circle. So I'll fill in the trunk to show that the trunk has mass and density because that's the solid wooden part of the tree. And then the canopy is going to be a hollow circle outside of that circle. They're going to be concentric. I might add a few branches coming off that main trunk just to show that it's a tree, not just a circle within a circle. And I'm going to quickly fill in where some of these trees fall. I'm not going for perfect accuracy. I'm going for an illustration of sort of where they are in relation to each other and how the space between them behaves. So really focusing less on individual trees and more on where the clumps are. This type of landscape is really common in parks. So if you have a park near your neighborhood, it's pretty likely that you'll have a really smooth, even lawn like this, and then some pretty large trees clustered together around the park. And these will provide shade and refuge and a place to look out from, as well as turn what would just be an open field into a really dynamic and interesting space with their colors and textures, especially when it turns fall and the leaves are changing and falling. It's really beautiful. I do want to take special note of, there's a really old tree right to my left. It's a blue Atlas cedar and it has a really interesting Dr. Seuss kind of shape. So that one I'm going to draw with a little bit more intention and care than the rest of them. And I'm going to document its really massive trunk and its strange little branches pulling off of that trunk. There are a number of ways that you can pick out a landmark in the landscape, but trees, especially interesting trees like this one, are some of the best ways to do so. Here's a point where I would normally start to document shrubs and some of the smaller species that are around the neighborhood. One part of observing the landscape that you kind of have to just learn with practice is for what's not, these big, huge elements. Trees are easy because they're so evident, but as you do this, think about what systems are hidden. Think about the ones that you can't see right at face value, and even the ones that you can't see at all. I can learn a lot about what a habitat is like or what my neighborhood's like in terms of natural systems if I pay attention to the wildlife around me. So I'm gonna, just to give this drawing a little bit more depth, I'm gonna add some green to the trees to give them a little punch just on one side. I like to do it on the shadow side. I'm also going to drop a little bit of a shadow just right off the edge of that canopy with my black marker. So I think I'm pretty happy with this drawing. I started with my network of paths and my buildings to give it an anchor. I documented where the significant clumps of trees were. I took note in my head of the wildlife that I see, some robins, some insects. And I added a little color and dropped a little shadow to give the tree some depth and kind of stand off the page. The important thing to remember when you're documenting natural systems is you want to do what speaks to you, and the more textural and expressive you can get, the better. It's really hard to document all the colors and textures you see around you, but by sketching them and putting them down on paper, you can really start to get a feel for what the space is like and what it means to you.
Our cities and neighborhoods have a variety of ways to move around. We often call these circulation systems. Circulation includes travel by cars and vehicles, as we can see here in this image of Istanbul, Turkey, or as we can see here in the complex highway and street systems in Los Angeles. We can also see that circulation systems in cities help determine the way our cities grow and the way we see our cities. For instance, transit maps, like this one from New York City, help New Yorkers and visitors understand their city. Designers, planners, and others are realizing the importance of circulation systems, including bicycle and pedestrian systems. So local leaders in Northwest Arkansas, for example, have designed, planned, and built many miles of paths and trails, including the Razorback Greenway stretching from Fayetteville to Bentonville. Landscape architects and city planners often talk about a pedestrian shed, or what we call a ped shed. And this is the area one can walk in their neighborhood. Oftentimes we talk and think about this in terms of what we can walk to within a 5 or 10 minute walk. We want you, as demonstrated by our students, to document these different ways of circulating through your neighborhood. So what are the ways that people take a bus? What are the ways people take cars? What are the ways you bike? And what are the ways you walk through your neighborhood?
I'm sitting here at the intersection of McElroy and Dixon on the south side of the University of Arkansas campus. I like this intersection as a study in movement and circulation because there are a lot of layers to it, and it's one of the busiest here on campus. So Dixon is one of the most popular streets in Fayetteville, and it ends right here to my right. So there's going to be a lot of vehicle traffic here, even when they're technically not allowed to during school hours, Monday through Friday. So there's always a lot of traffic backed up on this road, and there are always hundreds of students using the crosswalk right in front of me. So this intersection is made busier by the residence halls in front of, behind, and to the right of me, a few restaurants that are pretty highly trafficked by students, and of course the campus Starbucks, which is one of the busiest in America. So there's a huge combination of pedestrian traffic, vehicle traffic, bicycle traffic, and now that we have electric scooters here on campus, scooter traffic. I like to sit at one of the patios around this intersection and just watch. It's interesting to see how people interact with the built fabric of the campus and the interplay between bicycles, cars, and pedestrians. So when drawing a space like this, especially one so complicated, I like to anchor it with the buildings because those are the big space makers and have the most presence of mass. So I'm going to start with Founders in front of me, which is connected to the Starbucks and a dining hall. And those are going to be pretty simplified forms because I don't want to overcomplicate this drawing by any means. And now that I have these just basic masses of the building lined out, I'm gonna start to delineate what's street and what's sidewalk. I'm gonna put in my crosswalks because they see thousands of feet per day. So I'm pretty happy with the foundation I have right now. I'm gonna add just a couple more details, and then I'm gonna move into my markers and use those to help me break up the space and get a better look at some of the pretty complex transportation routes that are here. So the heaviest traffic here, and there are some bus lines that travel along Dixon, are gonna be this way. So I'm just gonna use big arrows of varying thickness to show where these vehicles are going. Most of them are going uphill. There's not really an easy way to come this way, so I'm gonna do a much lighter arrow. So there's going to be a little bit of traffic turning off of Dixon onto McElroy. Only this way though, because this section of McElroy is a pedestrian street. There are bollards here blocking vehicles from coming through, and there's not going to be heavy traffic this way because it's just parking. It's a dead end. So that's the basis of the vehicle traffic. Now we can move on to pedestrian traffic, and I'm going to do that in orange. The major pedestrian traffic is going to be coming this way and this way. There's going to be some peeling off and going into one of the big auditoriums in Kimple Hall down here. There's going to be a lot walking this way over to the business district of the campus. And there's going to be almost as many coming this way because there are 3 or 4 residence halls that we can't see from this spot I'm drawing from. Almost just as much cross traffic. And this way across McElroy. And then lots going into the Slim's restaurant right here. And lots going into Starbucks, for sure. Then there's going to be some connecting this way to the Founders Hall at the very top of Dixon. And some coming this way toward the Union. And of course some more going this way on McElroy. This connects to the very core of campus this way, so there's always a lot of traffic. Here we have slightly less, and I'm going to do this in a dotted line because this is a very steep hill. It's one of the most legendary hills to hike on campus, so people try to avoid it when they can. But going down is much easier, so that one I'm going to do quite a bit more solid. Of course, we have our rule breakers who go right over the center of the intersection. And then we have our cyclists, who are in an interesting situation because they love to defy all laws of circulation. A lot of the paths on campus are actually closed to cyclists to try to avoid collisions with pedestrians, but they pretty much have free reign over this area. And they'll use sidewalks, and they'll use the street as well, and they'll peel off, and there's a lot of bicycle parking this way, so I'm going to have them peeling in, and they go up, and they go down, and they go across. So this really shows that the cyclists are kind of rule the roads around here, because pedestrians get out of the way and vehicles definitely do too. I also want to take a little bit of note on material. So McElroy, where it turns into a pedestrian street, actually turns into an asphalt paver instead of the typical poured asphalt, and this helps delineate that it's not a vehicle road. This is a pretty typical scheme when a designer is trying to communicate that a street has a different purpose than you might consider. So a sort of paving material feels a little bit more precious and says, hey, pedestrians are welcome here. This is only really for vehicles on special occasions. And then I'm going to add just a few sidewalk joints to help communicate what is sidewalk versus what is street. And after that, I think I'm going to consider this drawing done.
Our cities, towns, and neighborhoods have uses and programs. We can look at this lens when we create a mental map. For example, many of our downtowns host a mix of uses in the same neighborhood, block, or even in the same building. This is often referred to as mixed-use development or mixed land use. Coffee shops, restaurants, and other places to get food are some examples of places that you might walk to in a downtown. We might look at formal uses like bookstores or libraries, or even small-scale book sources like little free libraries that are in a number of neighborhoods. Use also can refer to outdoor uses, such as recreation places, water parks, art, and other types of uses. Finally, use can also include neighborhood meeting places that are more personal to you. It might be a tree house or a special place where you meet with your friends or others. Can you think of what these kind of uses are, both formal and informal, in your neighborhood?
Hi, my name is Kirsten Rouse, and I'm a fifth-year architecture student at the University of Arkansas. Today we're going to be talking about Champions Hall, located on the intersection of Duncan Avenue and Dixon Street. We're going to be discussing how it's a primary example of use and programming in an area. So I'm going to start by drawing the basic footprint of the building as I understand it. Keep in mind that I've already explored the area to better understand the program in relation to its neighboring buildings. So as I go in, I recognize that the front of the building is wider than it is towards the back, and it slowly pushes inward. And I also want to draw the major streets intersections that come from each side, because that's an important component of our location, is that it meets at two street corners, or 8th Street corner. Oftentimes, a building's significance can also be determined by its location in relation to neighboring streets and sidewalks. So if your building is further away from the street side, it helps you to understand that this procession as you go towards the center helps you to define that this is a significant space and is separate from the others. Try to pay attention to what kind of traffic maybe centers around the buildings you're wanting to document. How wide are the roads around it? How wide are the sidewalks? Are there points where the sidewalks and where the vehicular traffic and the pedestrian traffic meet? Are there a lot of parking lots, or are there a lot of parks? Just try to pay attention to how all of these landmarks, whether they be formal or informal, it could be green spaces or roads or anything in between. Try to pay attention to how those interact in the neighborhood and how that begins to tell you of the place. On this site, the focal point is the plaza, which is pushed further back from the street side to give you a sense of procession as the public goes towards the entrance. And I know that on this I have an entrance that I came in on, a sloped walking path, and I know that we have this zone for seating. Champions Hall is a transition point between the industrial buildings neighboring it and the historical cultural center of the campus, because it's composed of materials from both worlds, if you will. You have glass curtain walls and large steel construction from the industrial side, as well as brick and more plaza-based focuses on the other side of the spectrum. It's important to remember while constructing your mental map that there isn't one right or wrong way to make it. You can draw your buildings in plan. You can make sections cutting through the building or through the streets around it. You can layer in color and texture. You can make it more diagrammatic to help you understand what's really going on around you. It may not be something that makes sense to other people, or it may not even be something that completely makes sense to you, but it helps for you to document and understand the architecture of the place and your experience in it.
The students have demonstrated our 4 different systems of mental mapping through looking at the University of Arkansas. We can also look at the neighborhood of the FAY Jones house in Fayetteville. We can show you a image of Google Maps of the neighborhood, but what's important is to remember that we need to look through our own lens of the mental map. So we can see the FAY Jones house at the center of the page, and surrounding that are numerous single-family houses on the same street. When FAY Jones built this house, this was on the edge of town. In fact, it was on the outskirts of town. Now it's in the middle of Fayetteville, and a number of things have grown up over the years. If we look through the lens of natural systems, we can see right behind FAY Jones's house is a Brooks Hummel Nature Park. This park is accessible, but not a lot of people know about it. It's a very private feeling park. You also might look at water systems like the lake or streams or other systems as well. We can also look at circulation in the neighborhood. You see that there's the primary circulation of the roads, as demonstrated on my mental map of circulation. There's also some dots that I marked on the map of pedestrian circulation, particularly pedestrian circulation along Evelyn Hills as I've used it. So finally, we can look at program systems around the FAY Jones house. The program or use systems include, as mentioned before, single-family residential. There's what I think are condominiums near the FAY Jones house on the hill above Evelyn Hills. There's a bakery, Rick's Bakery, down the street. And there's a number of retail and other establishments in the Evelyn Hill Shopping Center below the hill northwest of the FAY Jones house. You can put all these together side by side or even layer them on top of each other, and you can see how the different systems potentially interact with each other. And remember, these mental maps are your understanding of your neighborhood and your place, and they're a really important way to understand the value of a neighborhood from the perspective of the people that live there. Planners and designers are actually using mental maps to understand how cities work and how they actually work for residents that live there. So it's a very powerful tool. It's a tool that you can use to help guide your designs for this summer and your design ideas as you go forward.
By the time you finish your mental mapping exercise, you'll have several different layers of information that you can then put one on top of the other and create one holistic map, one holistic vision of your interpretation of your neighborhood. And really, again, it's important to understand that, first of all, you don't have to be a great drawer. This does not have to be 100% accurate. This does not have to be something that you could give to somebody else and they could measure it. This is your interpretation. So you can find the balance that's comfortable for you between drawing things that are an interpretation and is your perspective on why something is important, and on the other hand, something that relates to how a building or a landscape might be important to other people as well. So think about scale, think about position, think about the things that buildings and landscapes are made of. But of course, what really makes these maps personal and a reflection of your understanding is it's about your memories, your perceptions, and your associations. So the most important audience for these drawings, these maps at the end of the week is you.